Hi, everybody. My name is Brenda Romero, and this is my talk called Hidden Histories. So I'm going to tell you 5 stories. And for me, these were stories of discovery and something that fundamentally changed how I see the role of women in this industry and the broader tech community. So the first story is called Usual Suspects. And when we're talking about the role of women in tech, we will often bring out what I refer to as the usual suspects. And we already know who these are. They are, of course, Ada Lovelace. So she invents the very idea of code in 1843. And then we have Grace Hopper, who invented COBOL. And she also coined the term compiler. So she also coined the first computer bug, quite literally. We're looking at that bug here. And we also often talk about Hedy Lamarr. So Hedy Lamarr creates Wi-Fi. And these women are absolutely, don't get me wrong, they are absolutely worthy of celebration, and their contributions to code and technology obviously cannot be understated. However, I often find in articles talking about tech or women in games that are attempting to be inclusive, it's the same 1 or 2 or 3 people that are mentioned as if that's all there were. When in reality, if I said, let's talk about men in tech and important male figures in tech, we could fill this page and several more pages. And the reason that I think this is important, critically important, is because they form the stereotypes of what we see in our heads, what everyone sees in their heads when they think of what that person is. And they shape the opinions about what people want to become. So, for instance, what is a surgeon and what is a teacher? What's a nurse? What's a CEO? What's a lead programmer? And I saw this take place in my own home when I was going to this kids coding event. And my daughter, like, mind you, this is my daughter, right? And she says to me, it's all going to be boys. And she didn't want to go. And so you can see, like, in her head, the whole place was just filled with a bunch of little boys. And the reality was that wasn't even true. It was an event called Coder Dojos, the greatest projects that happens in Dublin. And there were tons of girls there. So in fact, I would say to me, it looked like there were overwhelmingly girls there. So these ideas, these perceptions shape people's opinions. So usual suspects is what most people know, and they make career decisions based on those things. My next story is called Impetus. So first, I'll tell you a little bit about me and what got me into the industry and what got me into this in the first place. So I get my start when I'm 5. That's when I start making games. And I grew up in northern New York, and my family had little money. And so my mother would take me to yard sales. And I would go around the place, and she would give me often a dime. And with that dime, I could buy whatever I wanted. So I would usually buy games. Most of the times, those games were missing pieces. So I would gather them all up and I would make my own games, and absolutely loved that. And it really led to a lifelong passion and fascination with games. When I'm 11, my mother gets me the most amazing thing in the universe. She gets me Dungeons and Dragons, and it is impossible to understate the love affair that I had with this game. I could create worlds, and I no longer needed to go outside. And I think that's why I felt when I saw Stranger Things, it was like, oh my God, all of those people are me. It was just absolutely incredible. So I gravitate toward Rolemaster by the time I'm around 14, and I end up rewriting the rules for Encumbrance, which to me looked like this, but actually weren't this. It ended up being that I had to rewrite the entire thing, which I did, and we played it for a couple of years. So in 1981, in a location that at least looked like this, I got my job at Surtech Software. I happened to meet another person who worked there. They were looking for somebody to man the helplines when this is prior to the internet. So I memorized a game, and when people called, I would answer the questions that they had about that game. So that's how I got into the industry and just worked my way up from there. The first game I worked on was Wizardry 1, Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord, and there is a screenshot of it now. And my mom, she was incredibly proud of me. She felt like I was really on the cusp of technology. I mean, it certainly wasn't something we could afford, and it gave me such a head start. It's also where I met my first husband. We fell deeply in love, and we're still together. We're still together to this day. So again, it was 1981. I couldn't get enough of computers, and really working at this company gave me an opportunity I would not have had access to. What it also gave me a chance to see was code. So I first saw code. The first code I actually saw would have been assembly language there, but I fell headfirst into BASIC, which I was taking at high school. So for me, code felt and still feels like Legos. It feels like digital Legos. Like whatever you understand, you can build something with whatever knowledge you have. So I begged our high school to continue to offer coding classes, which I took. And then unbelievably, I left early because I did get that gig at Surtech. And during that time, we put out a lot of games, and I continued to work for Surtech as I put myself through college. So during this time, I never saw myself as a woman in a man's world. In fact, my world at the time was mostly women. So this picture, Surtech, you can see here that there are 4 women and 5 men. I joined just after this picture is taken. And so it was parity, and it felt normal to me. So if we fast forward many years up until 2015, I'm now teaching at a college. And so I've been in the game industry for 30 years. I'm also teaching 30 years. Actually, I've been in the game industry longer than that. But I'm at this point in time, it's 30 years ahead. And I'm making games, but I'm also teaching. And as a woman in the university, I am put in charge of their diversity initiative. So I actually thought this was a pretty great initiative. It asked us to look at lots of different things that might impede making a more diverse candidate pool, more diverse PhD applicant pool. So I was actually pretty excited about it. And it asked us to look at challenges people face. So, for instance, during childbearing years, access to nursing, sometimes no maternity policy. So anyway, I put all this together, and I was super charged up to do this. The first email I get back has the following word in it, that this is half-baked populist jargon. And that research into diverse teams and diversity was just whatever. And further that, like the nutshell of it was that women just were not interested in tech. And there really was nothing you could do to make women interested. So needless to say, this caught me by massive surprise. And so I decided to ask a question about this. So I forwarded this email to the head of department, and I said, like, I'm offended by this. This doesn't seem to make any sense. And the response that I got was this is a direct quote: "There's little point in taking offense. In fact, if anything, I wasn't taking enough offense. And so I set out to prove them wrong." The fact that women have no interest in technology and have never really had any interest in tech. So now this moves into the next story, which is archaeology. What you are looking at here are the first computers. Women literally were the first computers. That's what this job is called. And programming jobs were advertised to women specifically because they required menial, detail-oriented labor. And those words are from the advertisements. And at the time, people deemed that women were a perfect fit. And in fact, up until the late 60s, IBM in the UK measured code in girl hours. I'm finding loads of evidence that at one point in time, here and there, women were definitely not the minority, and in some cases were the overwhelming majority. It was really deemed that the labor perfectly suited women. And if you can think about it for a second, like think about a typewriter, like, this is a heavy machine and somebody else will build the heavy machine, but who types into the heavy machine? Well, traditionally that would have been women. This menial, detail-oriented mindset was at the time framed so that this would be a perfect job for women. And we actually see this an amazing case in Dundee. So there's a big study done on this as well. It was primarily women who built the ZX Spectrum, and this is one of the most important computers in European early European coding. But these women were made to feel just as if they were sort of the assembly line workers, not really part of this technological movement that truly defined an entire area and in many genres. So same thing, Cray computer, women were often the people who were putting these things together as well. And so at some point in time, putting these things together isn't enough. So women need to learn how to code these things. And how did they code? Well, they coded it with 6502 assembly. It was just the language that the computers understood. And at this time, there's not a tremendous amount of value put onto this per se. And what's interesting to me is this is around the point in time when I am in college. And I don't remember being the only woman in my college program. In fact, there were loads of women. There were advertisements in the 70s that actually talked about the computer girls. A trainee gets $8,000 a year. A girl senior systems analyst gets 20,000 up, and it was really a job that was heavily promoted toward women. So as the importance of this goes up, because computers are obviously not going to be a fad, this is going to keep happening, the pay goes up. And as the pay goes up, men start to come in. Now, I'm not saying this to make men go, oh, here we go. This is the point at which she starts, saying things that make us upset. No, absolutely not. I mean, if you are listening to this talk, I already know that isn't you. And in fact, culturally, there were countries where women could not even work if they were married at this point in time. Men were the traditional breadwinners, and therefore it made sense that as the pay is going up, men are going to start coming in looking for that bread that they're hoping to win. It was just the culture of the time. And also there was another problem, that is there's more men entering the field. They didn't necessarily want to be trained by a woman. And so out goes the woman. It just wasn't going to work. And so we start seeing a lot of women leave. Now, culturally, things were not ready for a women-led tech revolution. And I think it's helpful to take a look at the advertisements of the time. So for instance, it's a wife saver. You can get arranged by Brown, sipped with a soil-free oven. And let's take a look at this one. This is from 1974. Now, mind you, we're talking about the same time period, right? So just you can see, like, if these advertisements in just mainstream media were okay, what would you expect it to look like in other places? So here's another ad from Legs in 1970. It's nice to have a girl around the house and I guess step on her head. There's another one where a husband's spanking his wife for, I guess, not getting, she didn't store test their fresh coffee. It's obviously absolutely ridiculous, but it gives you an idea of where we're at the time. So we were really on the verge of a female-led tech revolution, but our culture was not ready for it. It was a mismatch. And so this period we're in now could just be an aberration. And if you're interested in more on this, there is a fantastic book that I highly recommend, and it's all really well detailed. It's called Programmed Inequality. So I encourage you to check that out. So the next story is the unicorn anomaly. People often view female coders as a bit of an anomaly, so much so that we actually have the term female coder, which sounds weird. And so I sometimes hear questions like this, like, what's it like to be a female programmer? Or what's it like to be a female game designer? Or what's it like to be a woman in tech? As if there's one answer to that question. Like, for all of the women watching this, I'm sure that if we were in a big room, which we would be, obviously, but if we were in a big room and I said, okay, everybody, I'm going to answer on your behalf, there's at least 20 people who would say, no, that's okay, Brenda, thanks so much, but I would like to express my own opinion. And clearly there's not one answer to that question. Like, I've talked to multiple women in the industry, and I've talked to many women in the industry, but some will say, like, you know what, I really haven't had any issue. And then I will talk to other women and they have had the shocking issues. For me, I've largely had a great experience, but I've certainly had my fair share of weird things, things that I consider unacceptable. Probably the biggest of which was, this was Oh, geez, probably 15 years ago now, if not longer, I was talking to this guy who was an absolute giant in the industry. This picture is quite obviously not to scale. But I massively admired this guy. And we were having this completely professional work conversation. And like 20 minutes in, he moves his coat over. And he's sporting quite obviously an erection. And he asked me if I want to do something about it. Now, I'm a game developer. I've spent my life behind screens. I don't even know what to say. I don't even remember what I finally did say. I felt I was surprised. I was offended. I was scared by the oddity of the situation. I couldn't believe it was happening. And I just, I didn't know what to do. So I left. This is probably the most dirty, non-dirty picture ever in the history of a GDC talk. So as we're walking away, I'm just like, he's obviously still whatever, and I just want to clear people out of the way. Just what a disgusting situation. So there's other questions, though, that I get, like, what would you say to other women who want to be in tech or in games? And would you join our women panel in games, or would you be our diversity speaker? And then there's the statements that need to be debunked, right? Like, and I'm sure you've heard many of them. And all of it ends up coming down to my gender. And being so much more about my gender. And even if we take gender aside from that, right, it's this experience of being othered, right? Anybody who doesn't fit into the standard envelope is automatically made an other, and that otherness is highlighted so much more than their work is. And probably, to me, the biggest case was when Amal Clooney, she's an international human rights lawyer, and she was arguing before a case before the European Court of Human Rights, challenging an appeal on the genocide of 1.5 million people. And a reporter, unbelievably, asked what she was wearing. I mean, this is a woman quite literally changing the world. Like, what if we asked her this question instead? And there's a repeat of it. Here she is again. She's talking about ISIS at the United Nations. What does Time highlight? Her baby bump. So I'm not saying that these incredibly necessary efforts to diversify companies, conferences, and events are not necessary, but it would be fantastic if we actually asked these people to talk about their work at mainstream conferences as well, and not just their gender, their sexuality, or the color of their skin, because we quite obviously are so much more than these things. In 2008, I actually did an article on women in games, and I was given free rein to go the angle I wanted to go with it. So this is the angle that I went. I contacted a bunch of my friends and I asked them what it was like to be a male game designer. And these are the actual answers I got. What? That doesn't make any sense, Brenda. Wow. That's a pretty niche topic there. So I decided to double down. Now, mind you, these are questions women get all the time. So what advice do you have for men looking to break into tech? The answers I got, wait, you're actually being serious? Is this a joke? So just as a spoiler alert, to the best of my knowledge, my reproductive organs have never made a game or technical decision. I never said I want to grow up in design or code as a woman. I never said I want to play games as a woman. In fact, I don't even really know that I have any gender-based goals. So I never said I want to be like the best birth giver ever in the history of the world, and nor have I ever said I want to have the best menopause ever, though now at 53 I am actually rethinking this slide because I think the best menopause ever would be pretty fantastic. Now, that's not to say that I'm not grateful. I do know that things like this are incredibly important. We were at QuakeCon in 2014, and there was a guy here, shown here, dressed as a hot dog. And he was really excited to meet my husband, so much so that he kept, like, he would walk up and he'd walk away. And so we had a conversation, and I was asking him, are you a fan of his games? And he's like, no, yeah, no, but that's not it. So eventually I sort of coaxed it out of him, like, what was it? What was the thing? And the thing was this. It was that he could see that John was Mexican. And he said to me that John was his hero, not because of the games he made, but because he made them as a Mexican. And that identification was important to him. And it's also important to me. I mean, when I was first getting into games, people like Carol Shaw were my heroes. And we all need role models, and we need their stories to inspire us, whether that's in real life, tech, games, whatever. And so that's why it's so incredibly important not to comment women out of history, but rather to include women. Women say, like Margaret Hamilton. So Margaret was the director of software engineering at MIT, and she literally wrote the code that put men on the moon. And she did it with her daughter in the office many times. Her daughter, in fact, even pointed out an error that was highlighted to NASA. And they said, well, that our astronauts wouldn't make errors. Well, they did. And there's a movie about that. So there's also Lois Mitchell. So Lois Mitchell is instrumental to Fortran. And sometimes I hear people say, well, yeah, but did women do anything like actually hardcore in games? Or in tech? Well, how about an optimizing compiler? I think that's pretty hardcore. Frances Allen wrote the first one, and for it, she won the Turing Award. There's also Katerina Yushchenko. So she created pointers in 1955 with the development of the address programming language. So this work was actually not well known outside of the Soviet Union. And so in 1964, somebody in the US did the same, and for it, they won the Computer Pioneer Award. And, it's absolutely a great achievement. They did these two things separately, but Katerina did it first in 1955, and I think that's incredible. So yet another super wonderful hardcore thing. Here's Kathleen Booth, who created the first assembly language, and then and also designed the assembler. And then we have Melba Roy, who was NASA's computer, and then a personal favorite of mine because I loved BASIC so much. We have Sister Mary Kenneth Keller. Sister Mary Kenneth Keller, her work was instrumental to BASIC. And we also have Kay McNulty. So Kay McNulty, she's originally from County Donegal in Ireland. And she was the one of an all-female team on the ENIAC, all-female coding team. And a lot of these facts are that, like, a lot of this is just lost today as if women have never been in tech, which is just simply not true. We have always been here. So there's also Alexandra Forsythe. So she co-founded the Stanford CS program and wrote the first textbook. And interestingly enough, when she was going to Brown, she was doing her PhD in mathematics, and she was an exceptional student. However, she didn't get to continue in the program because the dean didn't approve of female mathematicians. So out she went and cut her support. And those challenges were not uncommon for women at the time. And again, I don't think anybody watching this was part of that time or was part of the decisions that were made at that time. It's the way cultures evolve. But back then as well, in games, we had people like Donna Bailey, who's responsible for Centipede, or Roberta Williams, who is one of the co-founders of Sierra. And maybe you've seen this famous picture of EA's, We Think Farther, and showing, like, here's all of our rock stars. A lot of people overlook that Ann Westphal is in that image. Ann Westphal was an absolute rock star coder, created many games and was instrumental. Here we have Carol Shaw, who prior, like a lot of people think that games sort of begin in the 80s. No, Carol Shaw was at Activision. She created River Raid. And then in 1978, she was the first person to program and first woman to program and design a video game for the Atari 2600. So seeing people like her was important to me. And then we have Mabel Addis, who created the Sumerian game. And this goes back to 1962. So this notion that women aren't interested in tech. Man, we have always been here. In percentage wise, there had to have been many of us, because it just doesn't make sense that there would be so many women involved in such important spots if there were like 5 of us that were there. In fact, the year that I go to college, 37.1% of computer science applicants are actually women. And so now the next story I want to talk about is the viewing room. So if we look at the broader tech industry overall, we can see that there are literally millions of women in tech, and we are half the population, but less than a third of tech workers. And of those, only a fifth of us are in leadership positions. And so the reality is that means women's influence on product development and company strategy is not at all what we'd hope it would be. And the results of this are non-trivial to our health, our well-being, our education, and our enjoyment, and our success. So if we take something like, say, the original Xbox controller, it was nicknamed the Fatty and then the Duke in all territories except Japan. So here it is in a normal man's hands, and here's a photo of it in mine. So it was given a blunder of the year. It was just way too big. And eventually the Japanese controller was released in all markets. And then outside of games, on June 3rd in 2019, Apple introduced cycle tracking, which seems like obviously that's a great thing to be in the health app. And so it just talked about fertility windows and, and letting women know when their periods are coming. And my bigger question is, why did this take 5 years? Like, there are 2 billion women in this age group. Health kit had been out for 5 years. I mean, even Disney released a film on it in 1946. It's a thing. It's a normal thing. And incidentally, this was the first documented use of the word vagina in a film. Random trivia, now you know. And it's also gotten into our AI. So in 2017, a group of academics decided to review bias in open source computing. And here's some good news. So women's contributions were actually rated higher and accepted more often than men. So that was heartening to hear, unless their gender was known. And if it was known, then it dropped by 20%. So obviously, that's, well, it's endemic and it's scary and it's wrong and it's bullshit. The good news, however, is that it's also engineered. And if it's engineered, it's a created problem, and it means that it can be changed. So as we look at the overall history of computing, women have gradually been pushed out. And we tend to view it as, say, a man's field. And then this is when we hear things like, the women aren't there, so I guess women just aren't interested in coding, except that's not true. Right? Women are interested in coding, and there are ways to bring them back. I deeply believe that it was a temporary aberration that was engineered, and I believe we can reach parity. Well, how can we do that? Well, first, I think we need to clear away the myths. And one of the big myths I often hear is that girls are not good at maths and IT. And that is simply not true. In fact, many studies show that girls are good at maths and IT, and unless they're told that they're not, and then they'll live down to it. And that works the same with boys, by the way. There was also a fantastic study done by Science Foundation Ireland that talked about how important the message is coming from parents. In fact, a kid's mother is the most important influencer of their children's future career choices. So if mothers say, absolutely, you would be great at this, kids tend to follow that. And so educating parents as well is incredibly important because they can influence their children's decisions more than anything else. And we all know that it must change. Women were the original computers, quite literally. We created code. We created programming languages. We built the machines. We put a man on the moon, for God's sakes. And just to be petty, we also built the man who got put on the moon as well. And as much as I'm saying this is about diversity, and it is not at all about exclusion. It's important for us to get to equal because there are loads of studies that show that diverse teams make better games and diverse teams make for better educational environments. So we need to clear away the barriers for what's keeping people out of, let's say, the other side of the room. And it's also the business case. Even more than that, companies need to have more workers. Like, this might be fine now, but as an industry, we are growing and we need to fill many more chairs. And in part to do this, I also think we need to change the marketing. So I decided to get in my this free time that I fantasize that I sometimes have. I decided to get back into C. And so I found a C programming tutorial, and this was the first and most recommended one. And this is the very first thing I see. So I imagine just rocking this thing up to my daughters and, them looking at this guy going like, I'm old and I'm white and don't you want to be like me, right? Like, if we're looking for equality and diversity, I think that there's way better ways to sell it. Like, why not having Margaret Hamilton there? Like, I love this, here's a woman who put man on the moon, like, let's do it. And then I remember this advertisement, which is currently my all-time favorite. This comes from 2011. So this is a company that was looking for programmers. And this was their ad campaign. So you would be, if you signed up and you were hired, you would get a tux, which I thought maybe I could rock the tux. But then you would also get cologne, which was Sex Panther cologne. which, okay. And then this is the one where I drew the line, like, I don't want their beard grooming oil. That's what that was. Cigars, whiskey, bacon wrapped money, fine. Beard grooming oil, no. Right? Like it doesn't say that you belong. And so I think it's important that we change the message. I sometimes think about doing something like having an exceptional summer camp or a summer camp for exceptional coders, and just, constantly telling girls that, girls are natural coders and IT is for girls, and like overwhelming them with this message, not because I just want to say it and hammer it home, but actually because it's true. Like it is really true. There were times in my life where I was told that I was no good. I was told by a teacher that I wouldn't amount to anything. I was told that I would live in the worst part of town. I was told I had no chance of getting into a college of my choice. And I was told not to make the games that ended up being part of the reason that I won a BAFTA. And what if I believed all that, right? Like, the good news is that I'm a fighter. And I wrote 3 books and I made those games and I got into that college, and I live in Galway, which is a long way from where I thought those people thought I would end up. And I'm grateful for my life, and I'm grateful that I didn't listen, but it's sometimes like I'm not a fighter, and sometimes I believe the shit that I hear. And I wonder how many girls we've lost to those messages that are just obviously not true. I mean, ultimately game dev is for everyone. And code is for everyone. And I want anybody who wants in these doors to come on in and see people who look like them, whether they're school kids or just entry level into the job, or they're lead coders, or they've gone up to the CTO level. Like, I want to build the ladder for those who come after us to show them where to go, so that when we look at an image like this, we don't think like, oh my goodness, it's girls coding. We look at this as just a completely normal thing. Like, yeah, there's some kids making some games. I want everybody to feel welcome in this industry. Thank you.